The United States has designated more than 50 elements and substances as critical minerals. The things on that list are going to run from the more familiar, things like copper and lithium, to perhaps the more obscure like neodymium, which is then used for powerful rare earth magnets that go into things like electric vehicle motors, as well as high-end microphones. But I think what is more important is not what is on the list, but how these things are produced. My name is Karl Friedhoff. I am a senior fellow for Asia Studies at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. It's not a case of just pulling these minerals and substances out of the ground and then plugging them directly into something like your phone. No, they have to go through a process of refinement. But the process in getting those things is chemically complex. It is resource intensive, putting stresses on already stressed infrastructure in some places like electricity and water. And it can also be environmentally damaging. For a long time, the United States and its allies and partners around the world were happy to let China take on all of this work because of the cost, because of the timeline, and because of the potential environmental damage. So China leaned into that, and now they functionally control large parts of it. They control somewhere between 50 to 90% of large pieces of this processing. And this gives, of course, China leverage over a large swath of the US automotive sector, as well as the defense sector, because China at some points can decide to throttle that supply. And what we've seen, at least since 2011, is that China is willing to use its control of these supply chains as leverage. And so now there's a whole process of how do we get this back? How do we lessen our dependence on China? And going about arranging secure supply chains that then avoid China for some of these goods that are needed, especially on the national security side. So far, the Trump administration has focused on access to the minerals themselves. They've signed deals with the Ukraine. They've opened up federal lands to increase mining. They're trying to streamline the permitting process of this to really bring in more raw minerals in a much quicker fashion. But that doesn't really solve the US challenge, because without the processing in the midstream, yes, we have the raw minerals, but we still have to send them to China to be processed. So now they're going out, and then once they come back in, of course, they're probably likely going to be 2 rounds of tariffs on them, driving up prices everywhere. So the United States, to combat this, really needs to set up more processing plants and refineries around the United States, in Canada, in Mexico. And that's going to be the challenge moving forward, especially because the timelines for building these is not short. The expense for building these is not small. And it comes with a whole host of problems around it, especially on the environmental side. And so if we're going to do this, it needs to start now, and it needs to be a really major outlay of funding to even begin to approach something that's going to look like a secure and safe supply chain.